Hi, I'm James Hamilton from Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal, and today we'll talk about one of the most important table saw blades you probably don't have in your shop. Most woodworkers start out with cheap general purpose table saw blades. In time, they realize that cheap blades often produce rough cuts, so they upgrade to a better general purpose blade or even a combination blade. It's a good move. A good blade will last a lifetime in many small shops. And general purpose or combination blades are excellent choices because the same blade can be used for both cross cuts and rip cuts. But as your skills progress, there's another type of saw blade you should consider because it will greatly expand your capabilities as a woodworker. I'm talking about a flat kerf joinery blade. Flat kerf blades are used for finger joints, tenons, rabbets, all sorts of table saw joinery. Basically, they can do everything a dado set can and many things a dado set can't. We'll get to that in a second. But first, let's talk about what makes a flat kerf joinery blade different from blades most woodworkers use. General purpose blades feature what's called an alternating bevel design, ATB. Each tooth is ground at the opposite angle as the one before it. This creates rows of knives that shear the wood fibers, and depending on the quality of the blade, it can produce a clean cut across the grain and a serviceable rip cut with the grain. Combination blades, on the other hand, feature what's called an alternating bevel raker design, or ATBR. This includes a flat ground raker tooth after every 4 beveled teeth. This raker tooth helps the blade produce slightly better rip cuts than a general purpose ATB blade, while still producing the same clean cross cuts. Neither a general purpose nor a combination blade, though, is well suited for cuts that don't go all the way through the workpiece, such as dados and other joinery, because they won't leave a clean flat bottom kerf. ATB teeth leave a V at the bottom of each kerf, and the added raker tooth on an ATBR blade will remove some of that V, but because the points of the beveled teeth are usually ground slightly higher than the top of the raker tooth, the result is something referred to as bat ears. These blades work well for cutting parts to length and width, but not so well for most joinery applications, especially any joint that will be visible, such as rabbets, dados, finger joints, lap joints, or even tenons. If you're going to create these joints on the table saw, you should own a flat kerf joinery blade. These are essentially rip blades in that all the teeth are ground flat. There are no alternating bevels. The clean, flat bottom of a kerf cut with a joinery blade is far superior to the rough surface left behind by other blades. No bat ears mean better looking joints. It is worth noting that a dado set will also cut a flat bottom kerf, so you can use one of the blades from your dado set for some joinery. The downside of a dado set, though, is that the teeth are usually wider than 1/8 of an inch, so they can't be used for some fine joinery. And they don't typically have a lot of teeth on them. That can lead to rougher cuts across the grain, depending on the quality of the set. In fact, if you haven't bought a dado set, or you have a dado set and you're not happy with it, I'd consider a flat kerf joinery blade before I would a new dado set. It can do anything a dado set can, it just requires a few more passes. Dado sets are more convenient, especially if you have a lot of the same wide dados to cut, but if I could only have one of the two, I'd probably choose the flat kerf joinery blade for its lower price and added versatility. That's right, I said lower price. A good flat kerf joinery blade is significantly less expensive than all but the cheapest dado sets, but they're more expensive than your typical single saw blades. At least the ones I use are. I'm not a fan of cheap blades. You really get what you pay for in terms of the cut quality and blade life. Any good blade, whether it's for joinery or just general cutting, should be a one-time investment that you resharpen many, many times. If you want some recommendations, here's what works for me. There are a few good blades on the market that will produce a true flat bottom kerf with no bat ears. I own 3 different brands. One is a Freud Industrial 24-tooth heavy-duty rip blade. It costs about $65. Amana also makes one they call an industrial quality ripping blade for about $90. I like the Amana slightly better than the Freud. They both do a good job at the bottom of the kerf, but the Amana seems to leave a cleaner surface on non-joinery through cuts, such as when I'm ripping thick hardwood or ripping the edges of boards I'm going to glue up to make a wider panel. But that's going beyond joinery, and for pure joinery, I kind of wish I had saved my money on these two, because I discovered the Ridge Carbide TS2000 flat top box joint blade. It's a bit more expensive than the Amana, With the discount code, which I'll put in the notes below this video, you can get it for about 116 bucks. Otherwise, I think it's around 129. The reason I like this one better is because the teeth are thicker than the teeth on Amana. Thicker carbide means you can sharpen it more and get more life out of your investment. Also, the Freud and Amana blades are not really designed specifically for joinery. They're heavy-duty rip blades for making through cuts with the grain and thick hardwoods. They just happen to also leave a flat bottom kerf. However, the Ridge carbide is specifically designed for table saw joinery. The teeth are precisely ground to 1/8 of an inch wide, or 0.125. Both Freud and Amana claim theirs are 1/8 of an inch, but I found them to be slightly oversized. But the biggest difference is in the number of teeth. The Ridge carbide blade has twice as many teeth as the 24-tooth Freud and Amana. This makes it better suited for cutting across the grain, in my opinion, especially when working with veneered plywoods. And while I can't prove it, I believe the more teeth you have sharing the workload, the longer the blade will stay sharp, and therefore the longer it will last. The only other brand I know of that makes a 40-tooth flat kerf joinery blade is Forrest, and theirs is about $50 more than the Ridge carbide, and I'm convinced they're the same quality, so that's why I recommend the Ridge carbide. If there's a downside, though, to the Ridge carbide blade, is that those extra teeth aren't as well suited to heavy-duty ripping. The more teeth on the blade, the less efficient it is at clearing the sawdust from the kerf during a cut, which can lead to slower cuts and some extra blade marks. So I consider this to be purely a joinery blade. You won't get the double duty out of it with heavy-duty ripping like you would with the Freud or the Amana. But frankly, few woodworkers need a heavy-duty dedicated ripping blade anyway. Their combination blade is going to take care of all that for them. So to summarize, any of these blades will give you a clean flat bottom kerf for most joinery. The Freud is a good choice if you're on a tight budget. The Amana is a good choice if you want to use the same blade for heavy-duty rips in thick hardwood. But the Ridge carbide is my choice because it's got thicker teeth and more of them, which equals a longer life and cleaner flat bottom kerfs across the grain, especially if you work with a lot of plywood. And the Ridge carbide is more precisely ground to leave an even 1/8 inch wide kerf. Whichever one you choose, I'm sure you'll agree that flat kerf joinery blades will help you to step up your woodworking game. For more great tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker, be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. You can read and subscribe for free at stumpynubs.com. Happy joinery!